really enjoyed the meditation earlier, and I don't know about all of you, but like coming out of lockdown and into like a busy life again, it's just like, it just feels busy, hectic, full. And yeah, there's just something about just stopping, isn't there? Just sort of stopping that feels so lovely, and just doing that together, which is really sort of precious. So I'm enjoying that at the moment, those moments of stopping. Yeah. So yeah, Aryavachan for the last couple of weeks has been exploring really the Buddhist teaching and example around sort of suffering and how to meet suffering. So we heard 2 weeks ago about, in a way, sort of Aryavachan exploring the noble truths and that we do need to befriend suffering. And then we were sort of, you know, if you remember, those of you that were here, we were sort of exploring that in our own lives. Like, can we relate to dukkha, suffering, in our own experience? And did that sort of bring us along on the path? And how do we relate to it now? And then last week we had this really beautiful sort of example of how the Buddha meets suffering. And these beautiful stories, many of which I know really well, but the way that Aryavachan drew them out, like he'd obviously done a lot of reading about like more about the context and those figures. And it was like he really sort of wove this sort of these magical stories of how the Buddha was kind of meeting people. And yeah, very, very, very beautiful. So I was like really inspired going away from last week. And then I was aware like, oh gosh, but then in my life, like, how do I stay in contact with that? And the Buddha's reality isn't my reality yet. So it's like there's that inspiration of the Buddha's life and how he met suffering, and how there was this like natural unfolding of compassion from the Buddha because his consciousness had totally sort of shifted, and he no longer identified with this fixed sense of self. So there was just this like outpouring of love and compassion, and I'm not there. So it's like, you know, when I see suffering, sometimes it's really painful. Sometimes I feel blocked. Like sometimes I feel angry. It's just like, it's not, there's not always this outpouring of love. Sometimes I can get a glimpse of that and it's like, oh, that's really beautiful. So I just sort of wanted to, just continue that exploration really of suffering and compassion, and how we might move towards more compassion in our lives. Like, what does it actually look like for us to move towards expressing compassion? I also thought this would be a good theme to continue because we're exploring this Nature of Mind series, and the next seminar that's coming up is around this theme of compassion. So it's actually around compassion. It's Paul Gilbert, who I think founded compassion focused therapy. So he's sort of been interviewed by Maitreya Bandhu. So that interview is out now. You can watch the interview. And then I think I was going to say this right at the end. Next Friday, the 29th, so those of us at Lockerbrook are going to miss it, but hopefully it'll be recorded. Sadhanandi is going to do a seminar online which will explore that interview. So she'll do a bit more like practical exploration. Sadhanandi's wonderful. She's my preceptor. She ordained me. And like, I suppose like much of what I share with you tonight probably is just like her. It probably is not original from me, you know, like she's just a very, very inspiring Dharma practitioner who really gets down to like, what does it mean for us to actually practice the Dharma? Yeah. So I really recommend that. And then as usual with that Nature of Mind series, there will then be a sort of week of meditations that follow on from that as well. I can't remember who's leading those meditations. Can you remember?
The Nature of Mind.
No, okay. It's all on the website somewhere. Okay, so as well as the Buddha being inspiring in this whole area of compassion, so is Shantideva. So we have here the Bodhicharya Avatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, the way or the life of the Bodhisattva. And it's a very, very, very inspiring piece, and it's very, very challenging in equal measures. So I'm going to read you a verse from Shantideva. I should dispel the suffering of others because it is suffering like my own suffering. I should help others because of their nature of beings, which is like my own being. When happiness is liked by me and others equally, what is so special about me that I strive after happiness only for myself? When fear and suffering are disliked by me and others equally, what is so special about me that I protect myself and not the other? So Shantideva's like constantly sort of challenging us, like, why, if we're no different from other beings, why are we so selfish all the time? Why can we not sort of do more for other beings? So again, it's like, oh, that's so inspiring and a reminder of what we're aspiring towards. And also it's fine that we're not there yet. So I just sort of want to, speak for myself, but it's fine that I don't live like that all the time because I'm not enlightened. So yeah, we have like the Buddha and Shantideva and other figures as an exemplar, responding to the human condition. But they're also exceptional. There's been this sort of turn in consciousness, insight. They have, there's a level of sort of transcendental insight. There's something else that is coming through their consciousness, which we might not be in contact with yet. So how might we practice that aspect of like that others are no different from ourselves in the fact that they want to be happy and they don't want to suffer? So I think there's something about just like a recognition that we're all sort of trapped, if you like, by the human condition. So we can identify that in ourselves quite easily, and it's not always easy to see that in others. And that's because we are a bit attached to ourselves, and that's quite natural, that is like how human beings are made. So it's like that we've had to protect ourselves in certain ways, and we do think that we're separate and fixed. So it's fine that we do that. We don't need to like feel bad about that or anything, but it is really good just to try and see that, that is the view that we're like living out, and if you like, just reinforcing all the time. And just like, when are those moments where we can just glimpse something different, or we can act in a way that sort of challenges that view? So I think sometimes in this area we might even justify like hatred of others, especially in relation to, say, like injustice. It's difficult, isn't it, when we're seeing things in the world that we feel are unjust, and we're seeing people who it might be quite easy to feel that they're the cause of that. And it's really hard to see that, like it's really painful to see that. And yet it can be quite liberating if we remember that that person too, who we might be feeling sort of hatred towards, they are also trapped by the human condition. They also do want to be happy, and they've been, they've lived their lives through a certain set of conditions. And who knows how we might act if our conditions had been the same as that? We just don't know. So that's something that I just often try and bring to mind, or try and remember in those moments where I'm feeling the most intense sort of hatred. Or, it's just like, how can I just start to see this person as a little bit more human? And just remember they also don't want to be suffering, and they're also just sort of living out this human life that we're all trying to kind of navigate. So Shantideva, again, with an inspiring quote. Therefore, even if one sees a friend or an enemy behaving badly, one can reflect that there are specific conditioning factors that determine this, and thereby remain happy. I love it. It's just like, oh yeah, okay, that's really easy. You know, reflect on that and remain happy. But like, the reason Shantideva can say that is because that is what he's able to do. He's able to, you know, he's seen that, yeah, he's got insight. He's seen that is the case. There are these conditions. So we don't need to kind of get involved in that in a certain way that also causes us suffering, because essentially hatred causes us suffering as much as it does for those to whom it's sort of directed, as it were. So I thought I'd sort of start to explore what else is there when we actually try and express compassion or try and live a bit more compassionately. So Aryavachan touched on the near and far enemies, so I'm going to say a little bit more about those. Yeah, I really like this actually. It's just very simple. So this is what Vasantra says about the near enemies of compassion. I'm just going to read the quote because I think it's really helpful, then I'll unpack it a bit more. Look out for the near enemies of compassion. Watch out for pity, which is a feeling that can be stimulated in us by situations in which people are suffering. It can look like compassion, but actually isn't, because we're not really engaging. We may be expressing sympathy and concern, but we're holding back somewhere. Our heart isn't going out to the person or situation. We're not really empathizing, not managing to meet the situation with an open heart. There is often a sentimental quality to the feeling. Also, keep on the watch for horrified anxiety, that sense of, oh no, which is actually still about us and not about the situation. What we are responding to is our own feeling, our reaction, rather than that person and their suffering. Sometimes it comes from a sense that the situation calls for action on our part, but we don't know what to do, or we feel inadequate doing it. When those feelings arise, we need to catch them and allow ourselves to experience them with kindly awareness, acknowledging that something in us isn't finding this situation easy to open to. Having done that and resourced ourselves in whatever way we can, we then do our best to give our awareness more fully to the actual suffering, as much as possible, allowing ourselves to empathize. So some of you might have heard of the Brahma Viharas. So that's this set of what are known as the divine abodes or the sublime abodes. And the first of those is metta. So metta is kind of like the roots, if you like. And then basically the Brahma Viharas are the other sort of emotions that arise when metta meets different things. So when metta meets suffering, that automatically becomes compassion, karuna. So you don't need to, that's what the poem that I gave earlier, you don't need to create or develop compassion. You just need to have enough metta. And then whatever metta meets, it becomes these beautiful different qualities. So when it meets suffering, it becomes karuna. And I think Bhante says somewhere, I can't remember if I wrote this down, that karuna sort of has this like, oh gosh, how does he describe it? He says something like there's like a shadow or something. Or there's something that he describes which is like the tone. It's like a more somber tone or something. So it's like metta. It's like that sort of open-heartedness, but there's a more sort of somber tone. That's karuna because it's meeting suffering. And then when metta meets joy in others, it becomes mudita, which is sympathetic joy. So that's like happiness at others' happiness, which is just like really beautiful. So that has a really like uplifting kind of tone or quality. And then when metta meets both joy and suffering together, I do this because that's how I see it in my mind, it becomes equanimity. So our lives, there is joy, there is suffering in all human lives. And when metta meets that, it it becomes equanimity in its fullness. So so in a way, when we're thinking about compassion, we don't need to think about how do we develop more compassion. We just need to think about how we can deepen our metta, how we can deepen that sense of loving kindness, and then just allow that to kind of meet whatever we meet in the world. So I'm just talking about compassion this evening, but in a way I could be talking about the Brahmaviharas more broadly. And each of them has these near and far enemies. So we've heard the near and far enemy, well, the near enemies there of compassion. The far enemy of compassion is hatred. So that's like you've got compassion. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got hatred. So Ratnavandana is a really, really wonderful practitioner who explores the Brahmaviharas a lot. And she says that, well, it's in the traditional teaching, but I just love the way she sort of explores the Brahmaviharas. And with any of the near enemies that you're feeling around compassion, what helps is actually to bring in a bit more mudita. So if you're feeling like pity for someone, that sentimental pity, which I remember the first time I heard that and I was like, oh, pity is not a bad thing. And then like when I heard the sort of description of it, it's like, oh, it just feels really like sticky and yucky, because it's not, you're not actually really feeling for that person. You're like feeling sorry for them or something, which is really horrible. It's not very nice to feel sort of sorry for someone actually. But if you imagine when you see that person, that actually you see their fullness and you imagine they have joy in their life, they have love in their life, that is mudita. And when that comes in, it's like the pity is sort of no longer there, because there's not like that yuckiness. You're seeing someone more in their fullness as a human being. So yeah, mudita, that sense of like, oh, this person, yes, they're experiencing suffering, but they do also experience joy. Like it just brings in more fullness of that person and their being. And you know, that's the same in ourselves. If we're suffering, I know for myself, it's like, it's very easy to get into self-pity and just feeling like, oh God, this is awful, this is terrible, no one else gets this, you know. It's like very easy to get into that, like, oh. And actually, if you can just recognize in your own experience moments of joy, of beauty, of love, of connection, then that changes that quality. It's like, oh, that's not my whole experience. The whole, like, what I feel is like, woe is me. It's like, oh, that's not the whole of it. There's like much more in my experience. There's much more sort of fullness there. So that sort of leads me on to conceit. So I was going to say I like conceit. What I actually mean is like me and Sri Rajani. I wanted to say a special welcome to Sri Rajani, who's here this evening. So those of you in the room, most of you have met her, but I don't know, online you can, if you wave it that way, Sri Rajani. So Sri Rajani is just like waving at the camera. There we go. Yeah, so Sri Rajani is a very good friend of mine who we worked together for many years, and she's now in Nottingham working with Soph, which is very lovely. Yeah, we were saying the other day, we were talking a couple of days ago about conceit, and well, we didn't say very much actually, but it reminded me like, oh yeah, I often come back to exploring conceit. I think it's a really interesting thing to explore, and it came up for me quite strongly on a solitary retreat last year. So I was aware that in many situations, I can feel that I'm not quite good enough. And then in some situations, I can feel that I'm better than others. So there's this like constant like pitching myself in relation to others, either not being good enough against others or feeling better and just like, oh, I know better than this. And there's also another one, which is that we sort of, we see ourselves as kind of equal. So it's anything where we're relating to other people or comparing to other people, that's conceit. It's seeing ourselves as separate and fixed. It's, in a way, it's sort of grasping to our sort of own sense of self and being caught up in our conditions. So it's where I find it's where my mind is kind of hooked on me, like making me or something. So what really helped on my solitary retreat last year was I found a talk around this, because I was aware, like, oh, this is the area that I wanted to explore a bit more in my practice. And I found a talk by Subhuti, who just was very reassuring and said, you really don't need to feel bad about the fact that you feel conceit. Like, that is just part of the human condition. And it's like, oh yeah, like anytime I hear anything like that, it's just really reassuring, because what you can do is start to add on a load more arrows of like, oh, you know, oh, I'm not good enough. And then it's like, oh, but I shouldn't be feeling I'm not good enough, because that's conceit. You know, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, sort of being hard to myself about that. And yeah, so it took out that whole level of everything else. And it's just like, oh, okay, conceit. I can just name it as conceit. And I don't need to take that too seriously. It's like, that's okay that that's there. But what I can do is sort of challenge that view. So yeah, I gave the example of, you know, that self-pity or martyrdom that I can feel at times, like this is so hard. So just seeing that I'm doing this and unhooking from that clinging really, really helps. And also like rejoicing either in others or myself and noticing moments of ease. So just like being much more present and mindful to when that isn't the case. Just like, oh, can I feel moments of ease or things that are not, this is really hard? Or can I like move more towards others? Because actually, essentially, that sense of, oh, things are really hard is just me over-identifying with my own experience. And if I can start to move towards others and see others, that really helps too. So I think it's Dado Rinpoche who says, like, when you don't know what else to do, give. Is that Dado Rinpoche? Yeah. I think other people probably say it as well, but I say it definitely, like it helps. That's what I try and do. If ever I feel a bit too in myself, in my own, I can feel it, because I get like, everything gets a bit constricted, restrained in my body. I feel a bit like, I walk outside and I'm not looking, I'm not seeing the blossom, I'm not seeing other people, I'm just a bit like in my own head. When I get to that stage, what I try and do is do something for others or give. And it instantly changes that experience. It's like it instantly, I feel connected. I feel, it's just like, there's the relief of not doing that thing. Because the reason that causes suffering is because it's not actually true. There isn't a fixed self, you know. That's why it causes suffering, essentially. We are connected to others, and if we're living out of harmony with that, it's very painful. So yeah, just like, how can we move towards others more? And then just even like recognizing when we don't feel compassion, and again, not feeling bad about that, or even recognizing when we feel that far enemy of hatred. So in the 10 precepts that you take at ordination, one of the precepts is around transforming hatred into compassion. So that's looking very specifically at this whole spectrum you have, from really deep hatred all the way through to like just like mild irritability and frustration. So that whole spectrum of ill will, how do you sort of transform that into compassion? And firstly, you just have to recognize it. And I suppose quite often, well, yeah, definitely with all of this whole area, we just need to recognize that we're suffering ourselves when we do that. If we're feeling hatred, that is a form of suffering. And probably there usually is sort of some pain underneath that as well. So just like when Arivachin was sort of exploring this with us a couple of weeks ago, just like how can we befriend that suffering in ourselves without it becoming that, oh, everything's terrible. It's a really sort of tricky balance of like turning towards without like overindulging or something. it can just be exciting if you see that as like an opportunity to like play. Like, how can you just be with that more without becoming withdrawn and closed down? Yeah. So Bhante, when he talks, Sangha, when he talks about responding to the needs of others, he says, It'll take me a while to find it. Yeah, okay. So he says a lot before this, but then this is the bit that really stood out to me. There is, in fact, only one need of one's own that has to be fulfilled before one can preoccupy oneself effectively with the needs of others. And it is not a physical or material need, but simply a matter of emotional positivity and security. We need to appreciate our own worth and feel that it is appreciated by others, to love ourselves and feel that we are loved by others. On this basis, we can begin to develop the sensitivity and awareness to appreciate the real needs of others, not only their material needs or even their educational needs, but their need for an ideal to which they can devote themselves, a spiritual path they can follow. So, yeah, I like that, because Bhante's saying like we do have to, there is a need in ourselves that we have to meet, but it's not like a huge one before we can respond to others. But actually emotional positivity, and you know, that is pretty big for most of us, isn't it? It's not that easy just to feel that for ourselves often. But that's all we need, is to love ourselves and to feel we're loved by others. That's enough then to really be able to sort of respond to others. So we do need to remember that if we want to sort of respond effectively. And when talking about the Brahma Viharas, Bhante Sangha there says all we need to do is look after metta. So as I was saying earlier, it's like metta is the basis of all these positive emotions. And if we keep looking after that, and the metta bhavana that we did this evening, you know, if we keep looking after that, and not only doing that on the cushion, but when we're around people, with people, how can we express or be in contact with metta more? If we look after that, then those other positive emotions will just like naturally unfold. So thanks to Eve, who drew out this beautiful quote, which I then found down in the bookshop last week or something, and I was like, oh yes, that's perfect. So metta has the taste of freedom. This is Sangha, by the way, in Living with Kindness. Metta has the taste of freedom. If you are able to act out of metta, if you treat others as yourself, you are acting as if the distinction you unthinkingly create in your mind between yourself and others simply did not exist. Ooh. In doing so, you free yourself from the power of the illusion. I'm going to read it again because it's so good. Made me tickle. Metta has the taste of freedom. If you are able to act out of metta, if you treat others as yourself, you are acting as if the distinction you unthinkingly create in your mind between yourself and others simply did not exist. In doing so, you free yourself from the power of the illusion. Oh, how good's that? That's so good. So he's just saying like metta has that taste of freedom. You know metta because it has a taste of freedom. But also it's like, oh, there's something that I can't grasp here because there's a link there for me with something Vasantra said once, which is like, I can't even remember it. But, oh, that was it. In a retreat that Vasantra was leading, and we were sort of talking about the idea of no fixed self. And I was saying I feel quite a fear when I reflect on the fact that there's not a fixed self. And he just very straightforward, he said, oh, you don't need to worry about it because it doesn't exist anyway. Like, it's not like it exists and you're trying to get rid of it, which is what the fear comes from. It's like that there's something there that I'm trying to destroy. That's where the fear comes. He's like, you don't need to worry because it's not there anyway. Like, that's an illusion. And suddenly it's like, oh yeah. It's like, oh, I don't like, and yeah, that's, to me, that's sort of what Banti's saying there. Like, you just act as if that's not the case. And then suddenly there's this sort of freedom. Yeah, really love that. And then there's this beautiful other thing that Ratnavandana draws out in relation to compassion. And that is that she just says, all we need to do really when others are suffering is just sort of be there and just like bear witness to that. Just be there. You don't need to do anything. So compassion in action, I've entitled this talk, but in a way, like, compassion in action is just befriending. That's all the action has to be. It doesn't have to be something big. And I think often we feel like what do I need to do here? And we sort of underestimate how powerful it is just being with, in ourselves and in others. So I was thinking of some examples. You've got like, I'm really moved often by animal rights or vegan movements where people will sit at slaughterhouses and just bear witness to those animals. It's just like they're there and just bearing witness to that. It's like, oh, there's something so sort of strong and beautiful about that, just like being with that, being with it very fully. And similarly with climate change, extinction, it's like, yes, there's things we can do, there's things that we can actively do. And there's something very beautiful and powerful of just like bearing witness, just like being with others and just sort of witnessing what's happening. And then a personal example for me, so my mum, I was with my mum when she died. My mum died of cancer. And it was before I was practicing the Dharma. And I wasn't able to just be with her and just bear witness to that, because I just couldn't accept at the time that she was going to die. And you know, that's okay, that's where I was at. But I often just feel like, oh, I just really wish I could have been with my mum more fully in that moment. And what's very beautiful is I was able to do that with my grandma a few years ago. I wasn't with her at the point she died, but I was with her a couple of days before. And yeah, it was like I didn't have to feel regret or guilt or remorse or anything like that. I just knew that now I have that capacity to just bear with. And so I could just be there very, very fully with my grandma in the way that she needed. You know, I was brushing her teeth with her and I was sort of helping her clean her nails. She wanted clean nails and, you know, so I was sort of acting, but at the same time, like, I was just sort of very gently kind of just with her in what she needed. And it was very healing in relation to me not being able to do that with my mum, but it was also, I just felt exceptionally grateful for the Dharma, because it's through practice, metta bhavana, but also sort of, you know, just general Dharma practice that I've been able to get to that point of being able to just like bear someone else's suffering to the point of, you know, them dying. Yeah. So just, this is a bit all over the place, but anyway, I just want to come back to it. So in relation to conceit, I just wanted to say, like, understanding the nature of our mind, and in a way that more sort of wisdom aspect of seeing that there isn't a fixed self, that supports compassion. So that is why wisdom and compassion, you can't have one without the other. They're so deeply interlinked. And that's because, like the Buddha saw through that illusion of a fixed, separate self, And the natural outpouring was compassion for other beings, because he saw that they were trapped in this human condition. So wisdom and compassion are very sort of deeply linked. So I guess like what I'm trying to say throughout this talk is like we can practice more metta, but also we can sort of look at the view as well, which is a more wisdom approach. And it's helpful to do both, because the view does need undermining, and we can undermine the view through metta. That's possible, and I do believe that's possible. But sometimes the view needs challenging a bit more head on, I find personally. It needs a bit more like real seeing, clearly working with, yeah. But I think mostly I was just walking home from the centre this afternoon. I was here working, and then I was walking home thinking about this evening. And I thought, mostly what I want to say tonight is something around staying with the sort of ouch and staying soft. So I was saying earlier that thing of like, yes, it's natural to like protect ourselves, and through that, in my own experience is that I get a bit brittle, I get a bit guarded, I get a bit defended. I can even get angry towards others, or I can withdraw, feel a bit isolated. What really helps me is like just thinking about staying soft. So sometimes I just think like, what is the quality or the tone of my experience? And if I notice that it's in any way brittle or kind of heightened or tight, then I just try and soften. I try and soften physically, because when I soften physically, that helps me soften emotionally. But I also just try, those things of like give, move towards others, sort of just that sense of like, what can I do that will soften my being in some way? Sometimes like I watch a film that I know will make me cry. Yeah. But yeah, can we soften physically? Can we soften in our heart? Just like breathing out in a way, and just that, because I think we need that to stay with the ouch. That was the phrase, to stay with the ouch. If we harden around that, we're not actually staying with that pain. But we can stay with it more if we just keep sort of softening. And the same's true in others. Can we just be with them and with their pain without needing to fix it? And can we just stay soft with them as well? Can we just sort of be soft with others? Sometimes when other people are suffering and the way they express that is difficult for us to be around, it can just get very easy, can't it, to just like think, oh. But like the more we can just soften, it probably will just help them soften as well and be able to be with that pain in themselves. Good, we've got loads of time for groups, this is good. So before we go into groups, I'm just going to mention again these nature of mind events. So the conversation between Maitri Bandhu and Paul Gilbert that I mentioned is called Compassionate Mind and Its Enemies. So the blurb, we had a bit of a quote from Paul Gilbert. When we give up blaming and condemning ourselves and others for things, then we are freer to genuinely set sail towards developing the insight, knowledge, and understanding we need to take responsibility for ourselves and our actions. That's quite interesting. He's talking about giving up blame and being free, yeah. So yeah, there's a section on our website which talks a bit more about those nature of mind events, so I just really recommend them. Okay, so let's go into groups. So there's a few questions that I gave in the blurb, and I have touched on some of them, but maybe they're questions we can just take into the groups. So how can we move towards more compassion in our lives? Why is it so difficult not to be selfish? And is there a freedom? Do we feel a freedom in considering others more? Good.